I have always liked to think of myself as something of an urban explorer. There are a ton of derelict buildings in my hometown, and I have visited each one. I found nothing of interest in many of them, but did find a group of mannequins that had been set up as if they were having a dinner party. I was running out of places to explore when I thought of the Quarry, which has been closed for nearly 20 years. It used to be the main employer in our town until the money ran out and everyone was laid off. It turned our once prosperous town into a bit of a ghost town. It took me almost a half hour to cycle there, and I had to hop over a fence to get inside. I stupidly got my trousers caught on the top of the railing and had to rip them to get off. I went through my bag of supplies and made sure I had everything I could possibly need. I made my way inside while gazing around at all the machinery that now lay rusted and forgotten. I was making plans on how I should spend my day as I reached the top of the quarry. I stopped dead in my tracks, or peering downwards at what lay beneath. There appeared to be what looked like a giant man who covered nearly the entire floor of the quarry. He was wearing a robe that was torn in many places and had long white hair. He lay unmoving on the ground with his head lying to the side as if he was asleep. I stood there speechless while my brain tried to comprehend what I was looking at. I began to feel lightheaded and realized I hadn't breathed in nearly a minute. I took a few deep breaths and started moving into the quarry. My eyes never left his face as I walked towards him. His size dwarfed anything I had ever seen in my life. My best estimate is that his body was about a mile or more in length. Everything about him was incredible, and I stood in awe of what I had found. I initially thought he had fallen from the sky, but noticed that the ground around him was flat, as if he had just laid down. If he had fallen, then there would have been an earthquake due to the force of his body hitting the ground. I made my way towards his face and stopped when I saw his eyes. It looked like something had been cutting into his eyes as I could see bloody pulp dripping down his face. I did a full 360-degree turn as I felt like someone was watching me. I couldn't see anyone but couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else here. The quarry was lined with shadows, and an entire army could be around me, and I might not even see them. I once again turned back to his face and watched in amazement as one of his eyes began twitching. I let out a scream as a black demon ripped its way out. It launched itself into the sky and landed behind me. I spun around to face it and felt fear running through my body. The creature looked like a crow, but the proportions were all wrong, as it was twice the height of me. It stared at me and seemed to be judging me. It let out an ear-splitting caw and threw itself into the air. Its cry was answered by dozens of other cries, as dozens of similar creatures appeared from crevices hidden along the length of the quarry. They began flying over my head, which reminded me of vultures circling their prey. Blood was dripping down from them, as they had obviously been feasting on his flesh. I barely had time to react when one of them suddenly spiraled down towards me. I threw myself to one side, but its claws cut into my shoulder. I began to panic as I knew there was no way I could get past these abominations. I had to avoid 2 more attacks and was near exhaustion at this point. I made a split-second decision and began racing towards the giant's body. The cries from above became deafening as I reached his face. His mouth was partly open, and I began to push my way inside. I felt something brush against my back as I finally managed to make it inside. One of the crows was trying to follow me, but was unable to open the mouth further. It pushed his claws in a desperate attempt to drag me out, but I retreated away until it finally gave up. I let out a sigh of relief and looked around me at what now could end up being my prison. The mouth was being lit by a strange orange light that was coming from his flesh. I expected there to be a rancid smell due to him being dead, but it strangely smelled like freshly sliced lemons. I checked my shoulder and was relieved to see that the injury was only minor, as the crow's claws had only grazed me. I ate and drank a small amount to replenish my strength while trying to decide what my best course of action could be. I kept gazing over towards his throat and wondering what could await me down there. My decision on what I should do was forced on me as the crows made another attempt to get inside at me. They were using their claws as levers and trying to pry open the mouth. I rushed towards the throat as one of the crows was now halfway inside. I ran down the length of the throat, feeling the floor beneath me sink with every footstep. The claws of the crows faded as I got further away from them. I finally reached an immense open space and halted while looking around. I could see his ribs high above me as they dwarfed any building I had seen in my life. There were a few cracks noticeable on them, as if they had been broken somehow. I heard a thunderous noise above me and looked up to see a giant maw lowering itself towards me. I could see lines of teeth inside that seemed to be swirling around like the bottom of a lawnmower. I began running into the cavern before it could engulf me. I looked over my shoulder and saw it had stopped and now stood still. I slowed down to catch my breath and spotted more of these creatures in the distance. They made me think of worms that had somehow been turned into demonic entities. They were slow-moving, so all I had to do was stay well away from them to survive. They were using their teeth to eat away at the flesh that lined the cavern. They seemed to grow in size every time they ate a chunk of meat. I found a corner that was well away from anything and had cover on nearly all sides. I knew that it would be dangerous, but I needed to sleep. I fell asleep with the picture of that worm's mouth floating above me. I awoke the next morning to what sounded like boulders being flung about. I peered out of my hiding space to see the worms fighting against dozens of four-legged insects. The insects had spikes embedded in their heads, which they used to pierce the worm's hide. Neither side seemed to have an advantage, and soon the cavern was littered with their dead and dying corpses. I grabbed my things and began to make my way towards the far end of the cavern. I had to dodge numerous attacks, but luckily they were more interested in killing each other than trying to get me. I was almost crushed at one time as one of the insects was thrown through the air and landed an arm's throw away from where I was. I reached the far edge of the cavern after almost an hour of walking and looked back to see the battle was finally over. The worms had been wiped out and the surviving insects were now feasting on their flesh. I continued on my journey and almost screamed in joy as I saw sunlight up ahead. I made my way through a long, narrow tunnel until I reached the tip and cautiously looked out. There was no sign of any crows, and there was a forest in the distance. I crawled outside and looked back to see where I had crawled out of. I laughed to myself as I thought this guy would definitely be a hit with the ladies. I managed to make it to the forest, but heard the screeches of the crows who were still circling. I now lie on my couch wondering if I should tell someone. How do you tell the world that you think you have found God's corpse?